Greetings. Thank you guys for tuning in for another video. I trust that you're glad to see me as I'm glad to see you. So, there are a few subjects which have preoccupied me quite as much as the subject of debt. To me, it seems as though debt has not just become common, it has not just become normal in our society. It seems as though debt has become essential. To put into perspective how much debt I'm talking here, consider this. As of the time I'm making this video, which is April of 2024, the United States government is about $34 trillion in debt. U.S. households are about $17 trillion in debt. Combined, this equates to roughly $150,000 of debt per person. That is from every man, woman, and child living in the United States. To me, this seems to beg certain questions. First off, why and how is it that so many Americans are living in perpetual debt? Why and how is it that the richest country on earth has produced the greatest debt on earth? And moreover, what are the consequences of a society that has become so heavily saturated with debt? These are the questions which I seek to answer in this video. They are the questions which I pose to you, and I encourage you to think on long after you have listened to this presentation. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to do too much prefacing with this one. I'm going to dive straight into it. So let's begin by having a discussion of money. You may not understand why just yet, but I don't think that we can actually approach this subject without having an understanding or discussion of what money is, where it comes from, and how it's made. So it has often been noted that rich people and poor people perceive money in radically different ways. And this is not because they're looking at two different things. This is because they're looking at the same exact thing in different ways, that is, from different perspectives. And all that is to say that money is arguably definable in more than one way. I'll give you an example. So money is a tool for making transactions. It is a medium of exchange. It is an investment vehicle insofar that it can be used as capital. And most importantly, it is a currency. Our money is currency. And our money happens to be a currency which steadily diminishes in value. It is a currency that derives its value from government authority. It is a fiat currency. And it is also a currency that is created out of thin air. And that's part of the reason why it steadily diminishes in value. The connection that needs to be made here immediately is that our incomes as working class Americans are based on a currency that is steadily diminishing in value. Now think about the implications or consequences of this. When you have a class of people who work to earn income, yet that income is steadily diminishing in value, it should not surprise us that we encounter a situation in which so many Americans have incomes that can barely sustain their expenses. In other words, the cost of living is so often outpacing the rise in incomes. And so this explains in large part why so many Americans are making just enough to get by, just enough to live paycheck to paycheck, maybe even just enough to keep up with the Joneses, yet never enough to be truly economically self-sufficient, self-reliant, and independent. In other words, all I'm trying to convey here is that a lot of Americans live lives of economic subsistence, yet we supposedly live in the richest, most prosperous nation in the world. There seems to be a lot of irony in this. Now, so far, I haven't addressed any of those questions that I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, which really concern debt. But make no mistake, what I've said up until this point is related to it. Just bear with me. What a lot of people don't understand about debt is that debt is an asset as well as it is a liability. What I mean by that is to a creditor, to a lender, debt is a source of income. It is a source of revenue. But to a borrower, that same exact debt is an expense. It represents an obligation to repay, and hence a forfeiting of a portion of one's freedom, at least at some later time. Okay? The book of Proverbs says that the borrower is slave to the lender. You understand? So I couldn't help but notice that there is a really neat similarity between, maybe neat isn't the word, there's a really striking similarity between the institution of serfdom in the feudal societies of medieval Europe and the institution of debt in the modern economy. You see, if you know anything about the serfs, you know that they were a class of people who were, quote, tethered to the land that they lived on. They were tethered to that land because they not only lived on it to sustain themselves, but they lived on it to work. and to contribute to the landlord. You see, the pretext for work for a serf's life, that is for a serf's work, excuse me, for a serf, the pretext for work was he worked in order to contribute to the landlord. He didn't work to earn his freedom. He didn't work to earn economic self-sufficiency and self-reliance and independence. No, he worked because he was an input of production in an agriculturally based economy. And so that land to him represented a liability because he couldn't just opt out of it. He couldn't just up and leave. He couldn't just buck the system. No, he was obligated. He was tethered to it. You see, but to the landowner, that very same land that the serf lived on and produced on was an asset. It was a source of income. See, the same exact thing is happening today with the institution of debt in the modern economy. There's so many Americans who are tethered to their debt. And the reason why is this, guys. It goes back to what I said earlier. Debt is an asset as well as it is a liability. What a lot of people don't understand about our money, our currency, is that we as American citizens have absolutely zero role in issuing it and controlling the supply of it in our economy. Let me explain. A lot of Americans mistakenly assume that money comes from the government. And I thought this up until relatively recently in my life. But the truth is that money doesn't come from the government. It comes from the Central Bank of the United States, aka the Federal Reserve. Now you may be thinking, okay, Gio, the Federal Reserve, that's the government, right? No, it's not. Federal Reserve is a technically hybrid entity, but it is an entity with private interests, and it is not subordinate to the government. It is not accountable to the Supreme Court, not to Congress, not even the President of the United States. And so by extension, it is not accountable to the people of the United States, okay, via the system we call a representative democracy. What you have to understand is that the government is just like us. It has expenses, right? It has spending goals. And so one of the ways that it raises revenue in order to meet those expenses is it collects taxes. When it can't collect enough taxes to meet its spending goals, what does it do? It borrows money from its central bank. But how the central bank creates money is it creates it out of thin air, okay? It creates money out of thin air that diminishes the value of all pre-existing money, that diminishes the purchasing power of the money that you and I have and are sitting in our bank account. The result is that there's more money circulating around, that money is worth less and less and less, and the government has become more and more in debt. And you and I have become more and more in debt. Why? Because this is what happens, guys. When your incomes can't sustain your expenses, that is, when you don't have enough disposable income or money in savings to meet your expenses, what do? You borrow money. It's the exact same thing the government does. You can't afford a college education, so what do? You take out student loans. You can't afford a house, so what do? You get a mortgage. You can't afford a car, so what do? You take out an auto loan. And God forbid you should get a credit card, okay? All this is to say that, guys, this system is literally designed to perpetuate debt. It is literally designed for people to live in perpetual debt and to continuously fuel their lifestyles on debt because incomes aren't satisfactory. Incomes can't sustain us, guys. Our incomes are based on a currency that is steadily diminishing in value. I don't know if I've made this clear or not, but to bring this full circle, I mentioned that the institution of debt in a modern economy has a lot in common with the institution of serfdom in the feudal societies of medieval Europe, and hopefully that connection seems very clear why I did that. But there's another institution which is much more familiar to us as Americans because it is so deeply embedded in our history, and that is the institution of slavery. Some of you may consider it grotesque to draw a relationship between the institution of slavery and the institution of debt in our modern economy, but please just hear me out on this. I was watching an extraordinary film with my mother several weeks ago called The Great Debaters. It's about these black college students who attended an HBCU down in Texas in the 1930s and ended up having a remarkable reputation for their skills in debate. Anyway, the film starred Denzel Washington. And at one point in the film, Denzel made a remark about slavery, that is the legacy of slavery and the objective of slavery, that has forever burned itself into my memory. He said the objective of slavery was to keep the mind weak while keeping the body strong. Subvert the mind, yet keep the body fit to work. So that the pretext for the slave's life is that he lives to work. He doesn't work to make a living. He doesn't work to earn his freedom. He doesn't work to emancipate himself from the system in the same way that the serf didn't. He works to function as an input of production in an economy that fuels itself at the expense of his greatest assets, his time and his health. That is that is modern slavery, guys. We live in a system where so many people, and I don't mean to sound patronizing when I say this, but it astounds me how as a working class American, you can graduate from high school and even college in this country having never learned anything about budgeting or investing or taxes or debt and credit and loans and interest, let alone how our monetary, financial, banking, and economic institutions and systems work in this country. It does not strike me as a coincidence that there is such a pervasive lack of education concerning the very systems, the very things which have ensnared us in a way of life that is not conducive to producing true wealth. A lot of people think they have wealth because they own things, because they possess things. And what I'm trying to convey to you guys is that wealth consists not in what you possess. It consists in living a debt-free life. It consists in living a life of economic self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and independence. That is true wealth. True wealth is when you can wake up in the morning and know, like, hey, man, I'm not up to my eyeballs in debt. I'm not obligated to be preoccupied with acquiring income that is based on a currency that is constantly diminishing in value, because I've set myself up in order to live an independent and self-sufficient life. That is true wealth. And so I'm not gonna, as always, I don't like to be too long-winded on this channel. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I hope I made this all very clear. Excuse me for some of the hiccups I made in this video. You guys know I usually always do these videos in one take, and as might be expected, I make some mistakes and don't organize things as well as maybe I should. But anyway, if you have any objections, any critiques, any comments, any questions, etc., as always, leave those down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I would love to know your opinion on the subject. And if you're interested in hearing more about this subject or any particular aspect of it, I would be more than happy to make more videos in the future discussing it in greater detail, especially the history of this subject. I'm thinking, is there anything else? No, I think that's it. Anyway, thank you guys again. Have a great day. Until next time. Bye-bye.